The woman stood in the dusty street of Hill City, South Dakota, with one hand pressed against her swollen belly and the other clutching a worn carpet bag, her wedding dress still pristine white, despite the long journey that had brought her here in the spring of 1878. Wilhelmina Zimmerman had arrived on the afternoon stage, her face pale beneath the wide brim of her bonnet, and every eye in town seemed to turn toward her as she stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk, because a pregnant bride traveling alone was the kind of scandal that made tongues wag from the general store to the saloon. She had nowhere to go. The reverend who was supposed to meet her, the man who had promised to marry her in exchange for her late father's small inheritance, had apparently changed his mind when he learned about her condition. The stage driver had delivered the news with an apologetic shrug, handing her a brief note that explained Reverend Patterson had urgent business in Rapid City and would not be returning to Hill City for the foreseeable future. Wilhelmina had read the note twice, her hands trembling, before folding it carefully and slipping it into her reticule. She had known, of course, that this might happen. Men did not want damaged goods, and a woman carrying another man's child was about as damaged as they came. The afternoon sun beat down on the main street, turning the dirt to powder that rose in small clouds with every step. Hill City was a mining town, nestled in the Black Hills where gold fever still ran hot despite the boom years being mostly behind them. The buildings were a mix of sturdy log structures and newer frame constructions, and the smell of pine and wood smoke hung in the air. Wilhelmina could hear the distant sound of picks striking rock, the ever-present reminder that this was a place built on hope and desperation in equal measure. She walked slowly toward the boarding house, her back aching from the long ride, and her heart even heavier. The baby kicked inside her, a flutter of movement that was both comforting and terrifying. 5 months along, and she still had not spoken the father's name to anyone. She would take that secret to her grave if necessary, because the truth would destroy more than just her own reputation. The boarding house was run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Calloway, who looked Wilhelmina up and down with eyes that missed nothing. "We don't take in trouble," she said flatly, her gaze lingering on Wilhelmina's midsection. "I can pay," Wilhelmina said quietly, opening her reticule to show the modest sum of money she had left. "I just need a room for a few days while I figure out my situation." Mrs. Calloway's expression softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. "1 week. After that, you'll need to find somewhere else. I run a respectable establishment." Wilhelmina nodded, too tired to argue. She followed the older woman up a narrow staircase to a small room at the back of the building. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the back alley. It would do. After Mrs. Calloway left, Wilhelmina sank onto the bed and allowed herself to cry. The tears came hard and fast, born of exhaustion and fear and the overwhelming sense that she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. But where else could she have gone? Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving her alone in Philadelphia with nothing but debts and a growing belly. The father of her child had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her, and his family had the power and money to make her life miserable if she caused trouble. So she had taken what little money she could scrape together and headed west, answering advertisements for mail-order brides in remote towns where no one knew her story. She cried until she had no tears left, then washed her face in the basin and changed out of her wedding dress into a simple calico gown. The wedding dress would have to be sold, she realized. She could not afford to keep something so impractical when every penny mattered. That evening, she ventured out to the general store to buy a few necessities. The store was crowded with miners and their families, and she tried to make herself as inconspicuous as possible as she gathered a small basket of items. But she could feel the stares, hear the whispers. In a town this small, everyone would know about the pregnant stranger by nightfall. She was counting out coins at the counter when a deep voice spoke behind her. "Let me get that for you." Wilhelmina turned to find herself looking up at one of the largest men she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the doorway behind him. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, and his face was tanned and weathered from years of outdoor living. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and startlingly gentle in that rugged face. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy wool shirt, and there was a long knife strapped to his belt. I can pay for my own things, thank you, Wilhelmina said, her voice cooler than she felt. She had learned to be wary of men who offered help, because it always came with strings attached. The man held up his hands in a gesture of peace. Did not mean to offend, just thought you looked like you could use a kindness. His voice had a slight drawl to it, and something about the way he spoke made her think he was sincere. The store clerk, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. That is Dalton Hayes, miss. He lives up in the mountains, traps and hunts mostly. Harmless enough, though he does not come to town often. Dalton Hayes gave the clerk a long look that made the man busy himself with rearranging items on the counter. Then he turned back to Wilhelmina, and she was struck again by how gentle his eyes were, despite his intimidating size. Name is Dalton, he said simply. And you are? Wilhelmina Zimmerman, she said, surprising herself by answering truthfully. I just arrived today. I heard. Whole town is talking about the pregnant bride who got stood up by Reverend Patterson. There was no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. Where are you planning to go after your week at the boarding house is up? Wilhelmina felt her cheeks flush. I will figure something out. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Finally, he said, I have a cabin about 10 miles from here, up in the hills. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry, and there is plenty of space. You could stay there if you need a place. I am not that kind of woman, Wilhelmina said sharply, her hands tightening on her basket. Did not figure you were, Dalton replied calmly. I am offering you a place to stay, nothing more. I spend most of my time out on the trap lines anyway. You would have the cabin mostly to yourself. Why would you do that for a stranger? Dalton's expression became thoughtful. Because I know what it is like to need help and have nowhere to turn. And because that baby you are carrying deserves to come into the world somewhere safe. Wilhelmina opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was saved by Mr. Henderson, who had finished tallying her purchases. She paid quickly and gathered her things, then turned to leave. But Dalton's voice stopped her at the door. Think about it. The offer stands for as long as you need it. She nodded without turning around and hurried back to the boarding house, her heart pounding. It was madness to even consider his offer. She knew nothing about this man except that he was big and lived alone in the mountains. Everything she had been taught told her to stay far away from such a proposition. But a small, desperate part of her whispered that she might not have any other choice. The next few days passed slowly. Wilhelmina spent most of her time in her room, venturing out only for meals and necessary errands. She tried to come up with a plan, but every option seemed impossible. She had no skills that would be useful in a mining town, no family to fall back on, and her money was running out faster than she had anticipated. Mrs. Calloway made it clear that her week was nearly up, and there were no other boarding houses in Hill City that would take a pregnant, unmarried woman. On the 5th day, Wilhelmina was sitting in the small parlor of the boarding house, mending a tear in one of her dresses, when Mrs. Calloway came in with a visitor. It was Dalton Hayes, his hat in his hands and his expression serious. Mr. Hayes says he has some business to discuss with you, Mrs. Calloway said, her tone disapproving. I will be in the kitchen if you need me. After she left, Dalton sat down in the chair across from Wilhelmina. He looked even larger indoors, his broad frame dwarfing the delicate furniture. I came to check if you had made any decisions about your situation, he said. I appreciate your offer, Mr. Hayes, but I cannot accept it. It would not be proper. Proper does not keep you warm at night or put food in your belly, Dalton said bluntly. And from what I hear, you are running out of time and money. Wilhelmina set down her mending, her hands shaking slightly. What do you want from me? Men do not offer help without expecting something in return. Dalton leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I will tell you the truth, and you can decide what to do with it. I have been alone for a long time, lost my wife and baby daughter to fever about 7 years back, and I have not had much use for company since then. But seeing you standing in that store, looking lost and scared, it reminded me that there is more to life than just surviving. So here is what I propose. You come stay at my cabin. I will provide for you and the baby, and in return, you keep house and cook meals when I'm around. Nothing more than that, unless you decide otherwise. When the baby is born, if you want to leave and make your own way, I will give you money to do so. But if you choose to stay, I will raise that child as my own, and no one needs to know who the real father is." The offer hung in the air between them, so unexpected and generous that Wilhelmina did not know how to respond. "Why would you do that?" she asked finally. "Because that child deserves a father, and you deserve a chance to start over without the weight of scandal hanging over your head." Dalton's blue eyes met hers steadily. "And maybe because I miss having a family. The cabin has been empty too long. You do not even know me. I could be a terrible person." "Could be. But I do not think you are. A terrible person would not have that look of fear and determination mixed together. A terrible person would have taken the easy way out." Wilhelmina felt tears prick at her eyes. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but his kindness was threatening to undo her completely. "I need to think about it." "Fair enough. I will be in town until tomorrow morning. If you decide you want to accept, meet me at the livery stable at dawn. If not, I will not bother you again, and I wish you the best of luck." He stood to leave, and Wilhelmina found herself saying, "Mr. Hayes, would you tell me about your family, your wife and daughter?" Dalton paused, his hand on his hat. For a moment she thought he would not answer, but then he turned back to her. Her name was Sarah. She was small and fierce, with red hair and a laugh that could light up a room. Our daughter was named Emma. She was only 2 years old when the fever took them both. I buried them on a hillside where the wildflowers grow thick in summer, and I swore I would never let myself care that much about anything again. But walls around your heart get tiresome after a while, Miss Zimmerman. Maybe it is time I stopped hiding." After he left, Wilhelmina sat in the parlor for a long time, her hands resting on her belly. The baby kicked, and she wondered what kind of life she could give this child on her own. The truth was, she had very few options. She could try to find work in Hill City, though no one would hire a pregnant woman. She could move on to another town, but she barely had enough money for stage fare, let alone to establish herself somewhere new. Or she could accept Dalton Hayes' offer and trust that this mountain man with sad eyes and gentle hands was telling her the truth. That night, she barely slept. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and weighing her choices. Every instinct told her to be careful, to protect herself and her baby from potential harm. But another part of her, the part that had watched her father die alone and penniless, the part that had been abandoned by the man who had promised to love her, wanted desperately to believe that there were still good people in the world. By the time the first light of dawn crept through her window, Wilhelmina had made her decision. She packed her belongings into her carpet bag, changed into her most practical dress, and left payment for her room on the nightstand. Mrs. Calloway was already awake, bustling around the kitchen, and she gave Wilhelmina a long look as she headed for the door. "You're going with that mountain man, are not you?" she said, her tone unreadable. "I am," Wilhelmina replied, lifting her chin. To her surprise, Mrs. Calloway's expression softened. "Dalton Hayes is a strange one. Keeps to himself mostly, but I knew his Sarah back before she died. He loved that woman more than life itself, and he was torn apart when he lost her. If he is offering you help, he means it. Just be careful with your heart, girl. A man who has loved that deeply can do it again, but it might take time." Wilhelmina nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked out into the cool morning air. The streets were mostly empty at this hour, with only a few early risers heading to work. She made her way to the livery stable, where she found Dalton already there, checking the harness on a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression eased when he saw her carpet bag. "You came," he said simply. "I came," she agreed, "but I want to be clear about the terms. I will keep house and cook, as you said. But this is a business arrangement, nothing more, at least for now." "Understood." Dalton took her bag and helped her up onto the wagon seat. His hands were large and calloused, but his touch was careful, as though he was afraid she might break. "It is about a 2-hour drive to the cabin. The road gets rough in places, so let me know if you need to stop and rest." The journey into the Black Hills was beautiful and slightly terrifying. The wagon road wound through forests of ponderosa pine and granite outcroppings, climbing steadily higher into the mountains. Dalton handled the horses with easy competence, and Wilhelmina found herself stealing glances at him as they traveled. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a firm jawline shadowed with a few days' worth of beard. His forearms, visible where he had rolled up his sleeves, were corded with muscle from years of hard physical labor. "Have you lived in the Black Hills long?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "About 10 years now. Came out here after the war, looking for a fresh start. Found Sarah in Deadwood, and we got married within a month of meeting. Built the cabin with my own hands, thinking we would raise a whole passel of children there." His voice was matter of fact, but Wilhelmina could hear the old pain underneath. Life had other plans. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. "And I'm sorry for whatever brought you out here alone and pregnant," Dalton replied. "But we do not have to talk about the past if you do not want to. Sometimes it is easier to just look forward." They rode in silence for a while longer, and Wilhelmina found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. There was something solid and reassuring about Dalton's presence, a sense that he was a man who meant what he said and followed through on his promises. It was such a stark contrast to the father of her child, who had been all charm and empty words. The cabin appeared suddenly as they rounded a bend in the trail. It was larger than Wilhelmina had expected, a 2-room log structure with a stone chimney and a wide front porch. Behind it, she could see a small barn and several outbuildings. The setting was spectacular, with the cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, and beyond that, the granite peaks of the Black Hills rising against the bright blue sky. "It is beautiful," Wilhelmina said, and she meant it. Dalton looked pleased. "Sarah picked this spot, said it felt like the edge of the world where you could breathe free." He helped her down from the wagon, then grabbed her bag and led her inside. The interior of the cabin was dim and cool after the bright sunshine outside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. There was a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking settee, and shelves lined with books and supplies. Everything was neat and clean, which surprised Wilhelmina. She had expected a bachelor's mess. "The bedroom is through there," Dalton said, pointing to a door on the far wall. "You will take that one. I will sleep out here on the settee." "I cannot take your bed," Wilhelmina protested. "You can and you will. A pregnant woman needs proper rest, and that settee is plenty comfortable for me." His tone left no room for argument. "I will bring in some more firewood and get your things settled. You should rest for a bit. The journey was long and you look worn out." Wilhelmina wanted to argue, but she was exhausted. The bedroom was small but cozy, with a large bed covered in a beautiful quilt, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the forest. She sat down on the edge of the bed, testing it, and was amazed at how comfortable it was. Within minutes, she had fallen into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, the sun was lower in the sky and she could smell something delicious cooking. She emerged from the bedroom to find Dalton stirring a pot over the fire. He had changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was damp, as though he had washed in the creek. "I hope you like venison stew," he said without turning around. "It is about the only thing I know how to make that is halfway decent." "It smells wonderful," Wilhelmina said honestly. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had barely eaten all day. They ate dinner at the table, and Wilhelmina was surprised by how good the stew was. Dalton might have claimed limited cooking skills, but he had seasoned the meat perfectly and added vegetables from what must have been a root cellar. As they ate, he told her about the area, pointing out where the best fishing spots were, where he set his trap lines, and which areas to avoid because of bears or rough terrain. "You will need to stay close to the cabin for now," he said, "at least until you get used to the area. It is easy to get lost in these hills if you do not know the landmarks, and with the baby coming, we do not want to take any chances." "When do you leave for your trap lines?" Wilhelmina asked. "Not for another few weeks. The season does not really start until late fall. Between now and then, I will teach you what you need to know about living out here, how to work the pump for water, how to keep the fire going, where I store the food and supplies, and we will need to make preparations for the baby. I will build a cradle, and you can tell me what else you will need." The matter-of-fact way he spoke about the baby made Wilhelmina's throat tighten. He was already treating the child as though it were his own, without hesitation or resentment. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked quietly. Dalton set down his spoon and looked at her across the table. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, and because that baby did not ask to be born into complicated circumstances. If I can make things easier for both of you, why would not I?" That night, as Wilhelmina lay in the comfortable bed, she thought about Dalton's words. She could hear him moving around in the main room, banking the fire and settling onto the settee. She wondered what had made him the way he was, this strange combination of fierce strength and gentle compassion. And she wondered, with a flutter of something that might have been hope, whether she had finally found a place where she and her baby could be safe. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Dalton was up before dawn every morning, chopping wood or tending to the horses or doing the 100 other chores required to maintain a homestead in the wilderness. Wilhelmina took over the cooking and cleaning, grateful to have something useful to do. She discovered that Dalton had a surprisingly well-stocked pantry with preserved fruits and vegetables, smoked meats, and even a few precious bags of flour and sugar. As she grew more comfortable in the cabin, Wilhelmina began to add her own touches. She found a box of Sarah's things in the wardrobe and carefully set them aside, not wanting to intrude on Dalton's memories. But she hung curtains in the windows, arranged wildflowers in a jar on the table, and organized the shelves so that everything had a proper place. Dalton noticed but said nothing, though she sometimes caught him looking around the cabin with an expression she could not quite read. They talked in the evenings, after dinner, sitting by the fire as the mountain air grew cool. Dalton told her about his life before Sarah, about growing up in Tennessee and fighting in the war, and then drifting west in search of something he could not quite name. Wilhelmina found herself telling him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her father who had been a clerk in a shipping office, about her education at a school for young ladies that had left her with few practical skills but many impractical dreams. She did not tell him about the father of her child, and Dalton did not ask. But one evening, as they sat watching the fire, he said, "Whoever he was a fool to let you go." Wilhelmina felt tears sting her eyes. He was engaged to someone else, someone from a proper family with money and connections. I was just a clerk's daughter who was foolish enough to believe his promises. Dalton's jaw tightened. Did he force you? No, Wilhelmina said quickly. I went willingly. I thought he loved me. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. When you told him about the baby, what did he say? He said I should take care of it. That was how he put it. Take care of it, as though the baby were some problem to be disposed of. The memory still burned. His family offered me money to leave Philadelphia and never speak of it again. I took enough to get out west, but I refused the rest. I did not want to owe them anything. Dalton was quiet for a long moment. That took courage. Or stupidity, I'm not sure which. Courage, Dalton said firmly. Stupidity would have been staying and letting them control your life. You chose to make your own path, even though it was harder. That is brave. Wilhelmina looked at him across the firelight, at his strong features and kind eyes, and felt something shift inside her. This man, who barely knew her, was treating her with more respect and compassion than the father of her child ever had. It was both humbling and a little frightening, because she could feel herself starting to trust him, starting to care about what he thought of her. As her pregnancy progressed, Dalton became increasingly protective. He insisted that she rest more, take on fewer chores, and avoid anything strenuous. He built a beautiful cradle from golden pine, sanding it until it was smooth as silk and carving simple designs into the headboard. He also made several trips to Hill City to buy supplies they would need for the baby, coming back with soft blankets, tiny gowns, and even a rocking chair for the bedroom. You're spending too much money on us, Wilhelmina protested after one particularly laden trip. It is my money to spend, Dalton replied mildly, and I want to make sure you have everything you need. One afternoon in late summer, Wilhelmina was outside hanging laundry when she suddenly felt dizzy. The world tilted, and she grabbed at the clothesline to steady herself. Before she could fall, strong arms caught her, and she found herself pressed against Dalton's broad chest. I have got you, he said, his voice low and steady. When is the last time you ate? This morning, Wilhelmina managed to say, though her head was spinning. Dalton cursed under his breath and picked her up as though she weighed nothing, carrying her back into the cabin and settling her on the settee. He brought her water and a slice of bread with honey, watching intently until she had consumed both. You need to take better care of yourself, he said, and there was a hint of anger in his voice. That baby needs you healthy. I was just dizzy for a moment. It happens sometimes. It should not happen at all. Dalton crouched down in front of her, his large hands resting on his knees. I know you are used to taking care of yourself, but you are not alone anymore. You need to tell me when something is wrong. Wilhelmina looked into his worried face and felt a rush of emotion so strong it almost overwhelmed her. I am not used to having anyone care, she admitted softly. Something flickered in Dalton's eyes. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was incredibly tender. I care, he said simply, more than I probably should given how little time we have known each other. But I do. Wilhelmina's breath caught. She should pull away, should maintain the distance they had established. But she did not want to. Instead, she leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I care too, she whispered. Dalton's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and then he was leaning in, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning. Wilhelmina kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. The kiss deepened, and she felt something inside her loosen, some tight knot of fear and loneliness that she had been carrying for so long. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Dalton rested his forehead against hers. I have been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. I have been hoping you would, Wilhelmina said, and then laughed at the surprise on his face. Did you think I was blind? You are a good man, Dalton Hayes, and I would be a fool not to see it. I do not want to rush you, Dalton said seriously. I know you have been hurt, and I know you are in a vulnerable position. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured. I do not feel pressured. I feel safe, and that is something I have not felt in a very long time. Wilhelmina kissed him again, softer this time. I am not Sarah, and I cannot replace her. I do not want you to replace her. Sarah was part of my past, and I will always love her memory. But you are my present, Wilhelmina, and maybe, if you will have me, my future. They sat together on the settee, Wilhelmina's head resting on Dalton's shoulder, and talked about what it would mean to build a life together. Dalton made it clear that he wanted to marry her, to make their arrangement permanent and give the baby his name. Wilhelmina found that she wanted that too, more than she had thought possible, but there were practicalities to consider. People will talk, she said. They will count the months and realize the baby is not yours. Let them talk. We will tell them the baby came early, and anyone who wants to argue about it can take it up with me. The protective growl in Dalton's voice made Wilhelmina smile despite herself. You would fight the whole town for us? I would fight the whole world for you, Dalton said seriously. You and the baby both. You are mine now, Wilhelmina, and I take care of what is mine. The possessive words should have alarmed her, but instead they made her feel warm and cherished. She thought about the man who had gotten her pregnant, who had offered her money to disappear, and then she looked at Dalton, who was offering her his name, his home, and his protection without asking for anything in return. The contrast could not have been starker. They were married a week later by a traveling preacher who came through the area. It was a simple ceremony, held on the porch of the cabin with the mountains as witnesses. Wilhelmina wore her best dress, and Dalton had trimmed his hair and beard for the occasion. As they spoke their vows, Wilhelmina felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, with this strong, gentle man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to love her anyway. After the preacher left, Dalton carried her over the threshold as though she were not 7 months pregnant and laughed at her protests. You are my wife now, he said, setting her down gently, and I intend to treat you like the precious thing you are. That night, they lay together in the big bed, Dalton's arms wrapped carefully around her. He was mindful of her pregnancy, his touches gentle and reverent. When he kissed her, it was with a passion tempered by tenderness, and Wilhelmina felt herself responding in ways she had not thought possible after everything she had been through. This was different from her experience with the baby's father. This was not stolen moments and empty promises. This was real and honest and good. I love you, she whispered into the darkness, surprising herself. Dalton's arms tightened around her. I love you too. I did not think I would ever say those words again, but here we are. As summer turned to fall, Wilhelmina's belly grew larger and her movements became more awkward. Dalton was endlessly patient, helping her with tasks that had become difficult, rubbing her aching back and fetching whatever odd foods she craved. He talked to the baby through her belly, his deep voice gentle as he told stories about the mountains and promised to teach the child to ride and hunt and fish. One evening, the baby kicked particularly hard, and Dalton felt it beneath his hand. His expression was one of pure wonder. "Strong," he said approvingly. "This child is going to be a fighter." Just like his or her father, Wilhelmina said, and meant Dalton, not the man who had contributed the biology. Dalton was this child's father in every way that mattered. In October, Wilhelmina went into labor in the middle of the night. She woke Dalton with a gasp, clutching her belly as the first contraction hit. Dalton was up immediately, his face pale but his hands steady as he helped her back to bed and began preparing everything they would need. "I should go get the midwife from Hill City," he said, but Wilhelmina grabbed his hand. "There is no time. The pains are coming fast. You are going to have to help me." Dalton looked terrified for a moment, and then his expression hardened into determination. "All right. I helped birth calves and foals. How different can it be?" "Very different," Wilhelmina managed to say between contractions, but she was grateful for his attempt at humor. The labor was long and difficult. Wilhelmina lost track of time, lost in a world of pain and effort, but through it all, Dalton was there, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her face, murmuring encouragement and love. When she screamed, he did not flinch. When she cursed him and God and every man who had ever lived, he took it without complaint. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, the baby came into the world with a lusty cry. Dalton caught the infant, his hands sure and capable, despite his lack of experience. "It is a girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, perfect girl." He cleaned the baby carefully, wrapped her in a soft blanket, and placed her in Wilhelmina's arms. Wilhelmina looked down at her daughter's tiny face, at the shock of dark hair and the eyes that were trying to focus on this new bright world, and felt a love so fierce it hurt. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You are safe now. We both are." Dalton sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Wilhelmina and his other hand gently touching the baby's head. "What should we name her?" he asked. Wilhelmina thought for a moment. "What about Emma, after your daughter?" Dalton's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel like you have to." "I am sure. Your Emma was loved and lost too soon. This Emma will be loved and cherished for all her days. It seems right." "Emma Hayes," Dalton said, testing the name. Then he leaned down and kissed Wilhelmina's forehead. "Thank you. For her, for us, for giving me a reason to live again." The next few weeks were exhausting as they adjusted to life with a newborn. Emma was a good baby, but she still needed constant care. Wilhelmina was recovering from the birth, and Dalton took on most of the household duties without complaint. He changed diapers, walked the floor with Emma when she cried in the night, and even managed to rig up a sling so he could carry her while he did his chores. Watching Dalton with Emma broke Wilhelmina's heart and healed it at the same time. He was so gentle with the tiny baby, so patient and loving. Emma seemed to recognize that this big, strong man was her father, and she would quiet when he held her, her little hand curling around his finger. One afternoon, when Emma was about a month old, there was a knock at the cabin door. Wilhelmina was nursing the baby in the bedroom, so Dalton answered. She heard a man's voice, unfamiliar and slightly aggressive, and felt a chill run down her spine. "I am looking for a woman named Wilhelmina Zimmerman," the voice said. "I was told she might be staying out here." Dalton's voice was cold. "Who is asking?" "My name is Gregory Walters. I have come from Philadelphia on a matter of some urgency." Wilhelmina felt her blood run to ice. Gregory Walters was the brother of the man who had gotten her pregnant. What was he doing here? She quickly finished nursing Emma and put the baby in her cradle, then went to the main room. Dalton was blocking the doorway with his body, his arms crossed over his chest. When she appeared behind him, he glanced back at her, his eyes questioning. "It is all right," Wilhelmina said quietly. "I know him." Dalton stepped aside reluctantly, and Gregory Walters entered the cabin. He was a slim man in his 30s, well-dressed in a suit that looked absurdly out of place in the rustic cabin. His eyes swept over Wilhelmina, lingering on her flat stomach, and then moved to the cradle visible through the bedroom door. So it is true. You had the child, he said. What do you want, Mr. Walters? Wilhelmina asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. My brother is dead, Gregory said bluntly. He was killed in a carriage accident 3 months ago. When we were going through his papers, we found letters between him and you, letters that made it clear he was the father of your child. Wilhelmina felt Dalton tense beside her. She laid a hand on his arm, a silent plea for him to stay calm. I am sorry for your loss, she said carefully, but I do not see what that has to do with me. Your brother made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. That was before he died, Gregory said. Now the situation is different. My brother's widow, Margaret, cannot have children. She has been devastated by his death, and when she learned about the baby, she became fixated on the idea of raising the child as her own. She is willing to offer you a substantial sum of money in exchange for custody. No, Dalton said flatly, before Wilhelmina could respond. The baby is not for sale. Gregory ignored him, keeping his eyes on Wilhelmina. You could have a fresh start, enough money to go anywhere, do anything, and the child would be raised in comfort, with every advantage. The child has a name, Wilhelmina said coldly. Her name is Emma, and she is my daughter. She is also the daughter of the man standing beside me, who is her father in every way that matters. We are not giving her up for any amount of money. Be reasonable, Gregory pressed. You are living in a cabin in the wilderness with a man who is little better than a savage. What kind of life is that for a child? Dalton moved so fast that Wilhelmina barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her, and the next he had Gregory by the collar, lifting him nearly off his feet. Get out, Dalton said, his voice deadly quiet. Get out of my home, off my land, and out of this territory. And you tell your sister-in-law that if she ever tries to come near my daughter again, she will have me to deal with. Gregory's face had gone white. You cannot threaten me. I will go to the law. Go ahead, Dalton said, releasing him with a slight shove that sent Gregory stumbling backward. Tell them that Dalton Hayes' wife and child are being harassed by some city fool who thinks he can buy anything with money. See how far that gets you around here. Gregory straightened his suit, trying to recover his dignity. He turned to Wilhelmina one last time. If you change your mind, we are staying at the hotel in Hill City for the next week. After that, the offer is withdrawn. After he left, Dalton closed the door and pulled Wilhelmina into his arms. She was shaking, though whether from anger or fear she could not say. He cannot take her, she said. Can he? No, Dalton said firmly. Emma is legally my daughter. I am named as her father on the birth certificate, and even if your word was challenged, there is not a judge in the territory who would take a baby from her mother and give her to strangers. He was trying to intimidate you, but he has no power here. Wilhelmina buried her face in Dalton's chest, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and leather. What if they try something? What if they try to take her by force? Then I will stop them, Dalton said, and there was steel in his voice. I told you before, I would fight the whole world for you and Emma. That includes whoever thinks they have a claim to my family. Over the next few days, Dalton was more protective than ever. He kept his rifle close and made sure all the doors and windows were secured at night. But Gregory Walters did not return, and after a week, Dalton made a trip into Hill City and learned that the man had left on the afternoon stage. It is over, he told Wilhelmina when he returned. He is gone, and he is not coming back. Wilhelmina allowed herself to relax for the first time in days. She realized that this was the difference between being alone and being part of a family. She did not have to face threats by herself anymore. She had Dalton, strong and capable, and absolutely devoted to their little family. That winter was hard, with heavy snows that kept them isolated in the cabin for weeks at a time. But inside, they were warm and happy. Dalton taught Wilhelmina how to make snowshoes and bundled Emma into layers of fur so they could take short walks on sunny days. He told stories by the firelight while Wilhelmina sewed or mended, and Emma grew stronger and more alert with each passing week. One night as they lay in bed with Emma sleeping in her cradle nearby, Dalton said, I never thought I could be this happy again. After Sarah and Emma died, I thought that part of my life was over. But you gave it back to me. You and our daughter. Our daughter, Wilhelmina repeated, loving the sound of those words. Do you ever think about her biological father? No, Dalton said honestly. I think about the man who got you pregnant the same way I think about a coyote that steals chickens. He was a problem that is now solved. But he is not Emma's father. I am. I was there when she was born. I held her first. I woke up with her every night for the first month. I am teaching her to smile and to recognize my voice. That is what makes me her father, not biology. Wilhelmina rolled over to look at him in the dim firelight. I love you so much. I did not think I could ever trust a man again after what happened. But you proved me wrong. Good, Dalton said, pulling her close. Because you are stuck with me now. Spring came slowly to the Black Hills, but when it finally arrived, it brought an explosion of wildflowers and birdsong. Emma was 6 months old, a chubby, happy baby with her mother's dark eyes and her father's, Dalton's, easy temperament. She had started to sit up on her own and was fascinated by everything around her. Dalton took them on longer outings now, showing Wilhelmina the beauty of the mountains in springtime. They had picnics by mountain streams, and Dalton taught her to fish. Emma sat on a blanket, watching everything with wide eyes and occasionally putting rocks or leaves in her mouth until one of her parents gently removed them. One afternoon, they were sitting on a hillside covered in yellow columbines when Dalton said, I have been thinking about building an addition to the cabin, maybe another bedroom, so Emma can have her own space when she gets older. And maybe a larger kitchen, since you are always complaining about the lack of counter space. I was not complaining, Wilhelmina protested, but she was smiling. You were, and you were right. The cabin was fine for one person, but it is getting cramped for a family. Dalton paused, looking out over the valley below. I also thought maybe we could think about having more children, if you want to, that is. Wilhelmina felt a warm glow spread through her chest. I would like that. Emma should have brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters, Dalton repeated, grinning. That sounds good. Although I will admit the thought of you going through labor again terrifies me. I aged 10 years during Emma's birth. But you were wonderful, Wilhelmina said, reaching over to take his hand. I could not have done it without you. They sat together on the hillside, watching Emma play with a handful of wildflowers, and Wilhelmina thought about how far she had come. A year ago, she had been alone and desperate, standing in the dusty street of Hill City with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Now she had a husband who loved her, a daughter who was thriving, and a home that felt more like a sanctuary than any place she had ever lived. That summer, Dalton began work on the addition to the cabin. He spent long days cutting and hauling logs, and Wilhelmina helped when she could, though mostly she focused on caring for Emma and keeping the household running. Several neighbors, men who lived in cabins scattered throughout the hills, came to help with the heavy work. They were rough men, mostly trappers and miners, but they treated Wilhelmina with respect and were gentle with Emma. One of them, a grizzled old-timer named Pete, pulled Dalton aside one day and said something that made Dalton laugh. Later, when Wilhelmina asked what Pete had said, Dalton grinned. He said I was the luckiest man in the Black Hills, to have such a pretty wife and sweet baby, and then he said, if I ever got tired of you, he would be happy to take you off my hands. He did not, Wilhelmina said, horrified. He did. I told him he would have to get through me first, and that shut him up pretty quick. Dalton pulled her into his arms, Emma squirming between them. But he was right about the lucky part. I am the luckiest man alive. By the time the first snow fell again, the addition was complete. Emma now had her own small room, painted yellow like the columbines on the hillside, and there was a larger kitchen where Wilhelmina could work without feeling cramped. Dalton had also built a larger bed for their room, and Wilhelmina teased him about his motivations for that particular project. I am a big man, Dalton said with exaggerated dignity. I need space to stretch out. Is that the only reason? Wilhelmina asked, running her hand up his chest. Dalton's eyes darkened. Well, there might be other reasons. I could demonstrate if you would like. Emma was already asleep in her new room, so Wilhelmina let Dalton pull her into their bedroom and show her exactly why a larger bed was a good idea. Their lovemaking had evolved over the months, becoming more confident and adventurous as they learned each other's bodies and desires. Dalton was always careful with her, always attentive to her pleasure, and Wilhelmina marveled at how different this was from her first experience with intimacy. In the spring of 1880, Wilhelmina discovered she was pregnant again. She told Dalton over breakfast, and he whooped with joy, picked her up, and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. Emma, now a year and a half old and walking everywhere, clapped her hands in imitation of her father's excitement, though she had no idea what was happening. "A brother or sister for Emma," Dalton said, his hand resting gently on Wilhelmina's still flat stomach. "This is going to be perfect." "You're not worried about me going through labor again?" Wilhelmina asked, remembering his earlier comments. "Terrified," Dalton admitted, "but also excited. And this time, we will have the midwife here well in advance. I am not taking any chances." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Wilhelmina was not dealing with the stress and uncertainty that had plagued her before. She felt safe and loved, and her body seemed to respond to that. She was sick for a few weeks in the beginning, but after that, she felt wonderful. Dalton continued to be protective, sometimes annoyingly so, but Wilhelmina had learned to appreciate his care rather than chafe against it. Emma was fascinated by her mother's growing belly. She would pat it gently and say, "Baby," one of her first clear words. Dalton taught her to be careful around Mama, and Emma took her job as big sister very seriously. In November, Wilhelmina went into labor again, but this time it was faster and easier. The midwife from Hill City had been staying with them for a week, waiting for signs, and she was there to guide Wilhelmina through the process. Dalton still held her hand the entire time, and when their son was born, he cried openly. "A boy," he said, cradling the tiny infant. "We have a son." They named him Daniel, after Dalton's father, and he was the perfect addition to their family. Emma was initially suspicious of this new person who took up so much of Mama's attention, but Dalton made sure to spend extra time with her, and soon she accepted her little brother. She would bring him her toys and pat his head gently, saying, "My baby," with fierce pride. Life fell into a new rhythm with two children. The cabin that had once seemed so large now felt comfortably full. There were always diapers to wash, meals to prepare, and children to tend. But there were also moments of perfect joy. Emma's first attempts at helping in the garden, Daniel's first smile, family dinners around the table, and evenings by the fire with the children asleep, and Dalton's arm around her shoulders. One summer evening, when Emma was 4 and Daniel was 2, they were all outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Emma was picking wildflowers, and Daniel was chasing a butterfly with the unsteady gait of a toddler. Dalton sat behind Wilhelmina on the porch steps, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Philadelphia?" he asked. Wilhelmina leaned back against his solid chest. "Sometimes, but I cannot imagine it anymore. This feels like the only life I was ever meant to have." "Do you ever regret not telling Emma about her biological father?" It was a question they had never really discussed in depth. Wilhelmina was quiet for a moment, watching Emma laugh as she added another flower to her bouquet. "No," she said finally, "because he is not her father, not in any way that matters. You are her father, Dalton. You chose her when no one else did. You love her as your own. That is what makes a father, not biology." "I do love her as my own," Dalton said softly. "There is no difference in my heart between her and Daniel. They are both mine." "I know," Wilhelmina said, reaching up to touch his face. "That is why I love you." As the years passed, the Hayes family thrived. Dalton's trapping business did well enough to provide for them comfortably, and Wilhelmina started a small garden that she expanded each year. Emma grew into a bright, curious child who loved exploring the mountains with her father, while Daniel was quieter but equally adventurous. In 1883, Wilhelmina gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Rose, and 2 years after that, another son they called James. The cabin that Dalton had built for himself and Sarah had become a home filled with love and laughter and the chaos of 4 children. Dalton built more additions, added a larger barn, and even created a small schoolroom where Wilhelmina taught the children their letters and numbers. Life was not always easy. Winters were harsh and money was sometimes tight, but they had each other, and that was enough. Emma never questioned her parentage. As far as she knew, Dalton was her father in every sense of the word, and he had never given her any reason to think otherwise. She had his last name, his love, and his unwavering support. When she was 10 years old, she told Wilhelmina that she wanted to be just like Papa when she grew up, strong and kind and brave. "You are already all of those things," Wilhelmina told her daughter, pulling her into a hug, "and you are going to do amazing things with your life." But Emma surprised them both by saying, "I want to stay here. I want to raise my family in these mountains, just like you and Papa did, because this is the best place in the world." Wilhelmina met Dalton's eyes across the room, and they shared a smile. Their daughter had put into words what they both felt. They had created something special here, a life and a legacy that would outlast them. One autumn afternoon, when they had been married for 12 years, Wilhelmina and Dalton took a rare day for themselves. The older children were capable of watching the younger ones for a few hours, so they packed a lunch and rode to the hillside, where Dalton had proposed building an addition to the cabin all those years ago. The columbines were long gone, replaced by the golden grasses of fall, but the view was just as spectacular. They sat together on a blanket, eating cold chicken and bread and watching hawks circle overhead. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" Wilhelmina asked. "In the general store in Hill City? I remember thinking you looked lost and scared, and that I wanted to help you," Dalton said. "I also remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, after Sarah." "After Sarah," Wilhelmina repeated. "You know, I used to be jealous of her. Jealous of a dead woman, which is terrible, I know, but I was afraid I could never measure up to your memories of her." Dalton turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "Sarah was my first love, and I will always cherish what we had. But you, Wilhelmina, you are my great love. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You gave me children and a home, and a reason to wake up smiling every morning. There is no competition, no measuring up. You are exactly who you were supposed to be, and I love you more than I ever thought possible." Wilhelmina felt tears slide down her cheeks. After all these years, Dalton could still make her cry with his words. "I love you too. I loved you from the moment you offered to help me with my groceries, even though I was too scared to admit it then." They lay back on the blanket, hand in hand, watching clouds drift across the bright blue sky. "Tell me about the future," Dalton said. "What do you see for us?" "I see us growing old together," Wilhelmina said. "I see our children grown and happy, maybe with families of their own. I see grandchildren running through these mountains. I see us sitting on the porch in our rocking chairs, holding hands and remembering all the good times we had." "That sounds perfect," Dalton said, "although I plan to be that old man who is still chopping his own firewood and telling everyone that he does not need help." Wilhelmina laughed. "I do not doubt it. You will probably still be carrying me over thresholds when you are 80. "Absolutely," Dalton agreed. "I will be the strongest, most stubborn old man in the Black Hills." They stayed on the hillside until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. As they rode back to the cabin, Wilhelmina thought about how much her life had changed since that day she arrived in Hill City, pregnant and alone and terrified. She had been running from her past, from shame and scandal and heartbreak. But what she had found was so much more than just a refuge. She had found home. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. There was the winter when Daniel broke his leg falling out of a tree and had to spend weeks laid up while it healed. There was the spring when a late frost killed half their garden, and they had to make do with less. There was the summer when Dalton was injured by a bear while checking his trap lines, and Wilhelmina nursed him back to health with fierce determination. Through it all, their love for each other only grew stronger. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's, Dalton's, strength of character. At 18, she married a young man named Thomas who had come to the Black Hills to mine for gold and stayed because he fell in love with the mountains and with Emma. Dalton walked her down the aisle at the small church in Hill City, and Wilhelmina cried happy tears as she watched her daughter begin her own life. The wedding was a joyful affair, with neighbors coming from miles around to celebrate. During the reception, an older woman approached Wilhelmina and said, "Your daughter is lovely. She has your grace and her father's kindness." "Thank you," Wilhelmina said, her heart swelling with pride. The woman leaned in closer, lowering her voice. I remember when you first came to Hill City, pregnant and alone with nowhere to go. People talked, said all sorts of unkind things, but look at you now. You have a wonderful family and a good man. You proved them all wrong." After the woman walked away, Dalton appeared at Wilhelmina's side. "What was that about?" he asked. "Just someone remembering the past," Wilhelmina said. "But the past does not matter anymore. All that matters is what we have now and what we are building for the future." Daniel followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled trapper and hunter. He was quieter than Emma, but just as loving, and he spent hours teaching his younger siblings everything Dalton had taught him. Rose was the artistic one, always drawing or painting the beautiful landscapes around them. James was the adventurer, constantly getting into scrapes and keeping his parents on their toes. As Wilhelmina approached her 40th birthday, she realized that she was exactly where she wanted to be. Her children were healthy and happy. Her husband was still the strong, protective man she had fallen in love with, even if his hair was now streaked with gray. The cabin had been expanded so many times it was almost a small house, filled with memories and love. One evening, after the children were in bed, Dalton pulled out an old wooden box that Wilhelmina had never seen before. "I have been meaning to show you this," he said, opening it to reveal a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. "What are those?" Wilhelmina asked. "Letters from Sarah," Dalton said. "I have kept them all these years, but I realize that I have not read them in a long time. I wanted you to know they exist, and I wanted to ask if you are all right with me keeping them." Wilhelmina took the box and looked at the neat handwriting on the envelopes. These were pieces of Dalton's past, evidence of a love that had shaped him into the man he was. "Of course you should keep them," she said. "Sarah was part of your life, and these letters are part of your history. I would never ask you to throw away something that means so much to you." Dalton pulled her into his arms. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" "This morning," Wilhelmina said, smiling against his chest, "and yesterday, and the day before that. But I never get tired of hearing it." "Good. Because I plan to tell you every day for the rest of our lives." The summer when Wilhelmina turned 42, they received unexpected news. Gregory Walters, the man who had tried to buy Emma years ago, had died, leaving a letter that was to be delivered to Wilhelmina upon his death. The letter arrived via a lawyer from Rapid City, who made the long journey to the cabin to deliver it personally. Wilhelmina read the letter with Dalton looking over her shoulder. In it, Gregory apologized for his actions years ago and explained that his sister-in-law, Margaret, had died of grief not long after he had returned from Hill City. He had spent the intervening years reflecting on his behavior and had come to realize how wrong he had been. The letter concluded with a bequest. Gregory had left a substantial sum of money to Emma to be held in trust until she needed it. "I do not want his money," Emma said when her parents told her about the letter. She was visiting with her husband and their baby daughter, and she looked fierce as she spoke. "I have everything I need. I have you and Papa. I have Thomas and our baby. I have this beautiful place. What would I do with money from a man who tried to take me away from my family?" "You could use it to build a bigger house," Thomas suggested, "or invest it in land." But Emma shook her head. "No. If the money exists, then let it go to the church in Hill City or to widows and orphans who need it more than I do. I am not going to take anything from that family." Wilhelmina looked at her daughter with pride. Emma had grown into a woman of strong principles and deep compassion, and Wilhelmina knew that had everything to do with the way Dalton had raised her. He had shown her by example what it meant to be kind and generous and true to your values. The money was eventually donated to establish a small school in Hill City, something that benefited the entire community. Years later, when Emma's children attended that school, Wilhelmina thought about the strange circle of life, how something born from pain and greed had ultimately been transformed into something good and useful. As Dalton and Wilhelmina grew older, they watched their children build lives and families of their own. Emma and Thomas had 4 children and built a cabin just a few miles from Dalton and Wilhelmina's place. Daniel married a sweet woman named Anna and had 3 children, settling on the opposite side of the valley. Rose moved to Rapid City to pursue her art, but visited often, bringing her husband and their 2 children. James, true to his adventurous nature, became a scout and guide, leading wealthy Easterners on hunting expeditions through the Black Hills, though he always came home for holidays. The cabin that had once housed just Dalton now saw regular gatherings of children and grandchildren, filling it with noise and laughter and life. Wilhelmina cooked enormous meals, and Dalton told stories about the old days while the grandchildren sat at his feet, listening with wide eyes. He told them about the time he fought off a mountain lion, about the winter when he was snowed in for 2 months straight, about the day he met their grandmother in the general store and knew his life was about to change. "Tell us about when Grandma came to live with you," the children would beg, and Dalton would glance at Wilhelmina with a smile that was still full of love after all these years. "Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever met," he would say. "She came to Hill City all alone, carrying your Aunt Emma in her belly, and she had nothing but courage and determination. I took one look at her and knew that if I did not step up and help, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I offered her a place to stay, and she was smart enough to say yes. Best decision either of us ever made." The grandchildren loved this story, though the older ones started to figure out that the timeline meant Emma was not Dalton's biological daughter. But if they asked about it, Emma herself would say, "Biology does not matter. Papa is my father because he chose to be. That is the only thing that counts." On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. It was a warm summer day, and they set up tables in the clearing around the cabin. There was food and music and dancing, and as the sun set, Dalton stood up to make a speech. 25 years ago, I married the woman who saved my life," he said, his deep voice carrying across the clearing. "I had been living in darkness for so long that I had forgotten what light looked like. But Wilhelmina brought the light back. She brought love and laughter and purpose. She gave me children and grandchildren and a reason to be grateful every single day. So I want to publicly thank her, in front of all of you, for taking a chance on a broken mountain man who did not deserve her." "You deserved me," Wilhelmina said, standing up to join him. "You deserved happiness and love, and I am grateful that I was the one who got to give it to you. These have been the best 25 years of my life, and I look forward to 25 more." Everyone cheered, and their grandchildren rushed forward to hug them both. Emma caught Wilhelmina's eye across the crowd and mouthed, "Thank you." And Wilhelmina knew she was not just thanking her for the party, but for everything. For having the courage to come west, for accepting Dalton's help, for building a life and a family that had given Emma and all the other children such a strong foundation. As the evening wore on and the younger children fell asleep in their parents' arms, Dalton and Wilhelmina slipped away to walk up the hillside where they had spent so many important moments. The moon was full, casting silver light over the mountains, and they could hear the distant sound of an owl calling. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Wilhelmina asked. "When you offered to help pay for my groceries?" "I said you looked like you could use a kindness," Dalton replied, "and you told me you were not that kind of woman." Wilhelmina laughed. "I was so defensive, so determined not to accept help from anyone." "You were scared. You had every right to be." Dalton pulled her close, and they swayed together in the moonlight, dancing to music only they could hear. "But you were also brave enough to take a chance when it was offered. That took more courage than you know." "I was desperate," Wilhelmina admitted, "but I was also hopeful. Something about you made me think that maybe, just maybe, things could work out." "They did work out," Dalton said. "Better than I ever dreamed. You gave me a second chance at family, at love, at life. I will never be able to repay that debt." "There is no debt," Wilhelmina said firmly. "We saved each other. Dalton, you gave me a home and safety and love when I had nothing. I gave you a reason to open your heart again. We were both lost and we found each other. That is not a debt. That is grace." They stood together on the hillside, two people who had been through so much and had come out stronger on the other side. Below them, they could see the lights of the cabin where their family was still celebrating, and beyond that, the dark shapes of the mountains that had been their home for so long. "Tell me again about the future," Dalton said, echoing their conversation from years ago. "I see us growing even older together," Wilhelmina said. "I see more grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren. I see us sitting on that porch, watching the sun rise and set, and being grateful for every single day we have together. I see us loving each other until our very last breath." "That sounds perfect," Dalton said, just as he had all those years ago. "And when that last breath comes, I want you to know that you made my life complete. You and our children and this life we built together, it is everything I never knew I needed." "I love you," Wilhelmina whispered. "I will love you always." "And I love you," Dalton replied, "my pregnant bride who hid the father's name and trusted me when I said the child would be mine. You gave me the world, Wilhelmina Hayes, and I will spend the rest of my days being grateful for it." They walked back down to the cabin hand in hand, ready to rejoin their family and continue the celebration. The path was familiar beneath their feet, worn smooth by years of walking it together. And as they reached the cabin, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, Wilhelmina thought about how far they had both come from that day in the general store in Hill City. She had been alone and pregnant and terrified, with no idea what the future held. Dalton had been a grieving widower, hiding from life in the mountains, but they had found each other, had chosen each other, and had built something beautiful together. Emma, who might have grown up without a father, had instead been raised by one of the best men Wilhelmina had ever known. Daniel, Rose, and James had been born into a home full of love and security. And now there were grandchildren who would carry on the legacy of kindness and courage that Dalton and Wilhelmina had worked so hard to create. It was not the life Wilhelmina had imagined when she left Philadelphia all those years ago. It was so much better. It was real and hard-won and absolutely perfect in all its imperfection. And as she looked around at her family, at the man who had chosen to love her when she had nothing to offer but a secret and a swollen belly, Wilhelmina knew that she would not change a single thing about the path that had brought her here. The celebration continued late into the night, with stories and laughter and love filling the mountain air. And when it was finally over and the last guests had gone home, Dalton carried Wilhelmina over the threshold one more time, making her laugh and protest that they were too old for such things. "I will never be too old to carry my wife," Dalton said, setting her down gently in their bedroom. "I told you that years ago, and I meant it." They lay together in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling around them, and Wilhelmina thought about all the nights they had spent like this, holding each other and planning for the future. There would be more nights to come, she hoped, many more years of waking up beside this good, strong man who had given her everything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Dalton asked, his voice already drowsy. "For being you, for choosing us, for making me believe in happy endings again." Dalton's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me with your heart and your child, for building this life with me. I would not trade it for anything in the world." And in the morning, when the sun rose over the black hills and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, they woke together and began another day in the life they had built. There would be breakfast to make and chores to do and grandchildren to visit. There would be challenges and joys, sorrows and celebrations. But through it all, they would have each other. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. As the years continued to unfold, Dalton and Wilhelmina remained the heart of their growing family. They aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing season. Dalton's hair turned completely white, and his body was not as strong as it once had been, but he still chopped his own firewood and refused help with anything he could still do himself. Wilhelmina's hair silvered, and her hands became gnarled with arthritis, but she still cooked for family gatherings and tended her beloved garden. Emma brought her children to visit at least once a week, and they loved hearing stories about the old days. One afternoon, when Emma's oldest daughter was about 15, she asked Wilhelmina, "Grandma, were you scared when you came to Hill City?" Wilhelmina thought about the question carefully. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I was alone and pregnant, and I had no idea what I was going to do. But I was also determined to build a better life for myself and my baby, and then I met your grandfather, and everything changed." "He's not really Mama's father, though, is he?" the girl asked. "I heard some of the other kids talking about it." Wilhelmina felt her heart clench, but before she could answer, Dalton spoke from his chair by the fire. "I am Emma's father in every way that matters," he said firmly. "I raised her from birth. I taught her to walk and talk and ride. I was there for every scraped knee and every triumph. Biology does not make a father. Love and commitment do." The girl nodded thoughtfully. I think that makes you even more her father than if you were related by blood, because you chose to be." "Exactly," Dalton said, and Wilhelmina could see the emotion in his eyes. Even after all these years, the bond between Dalton and Emma was as strong as ever. When Wilhelmina was 60 years old, she fell ill with pneumonia. It was a hard winter, and despite Dalton's best efforts to keep her warm and comfortable, she struggled to recover. For weeks she drifted in and out of fever dreams, and Dalton barely left her side. He sat by the bed day and night, changing cool cloths on her forehead, coaxing her to drink water, and talking to her even when she could not respond. "You cannot leave me," he said one night, his voice breaking. "I need you, Wilhelmina. Our grandchildren need you. You are the heart of this family, and we cannot lose you." But Wilhelmina was stronger than the illness. Slowly, painfully, she fought her way back to health. The day she was finally able to sit up and eat solid food, Dalton cried like a baby, holding her hands and thanking God for sparing her. "I am not ready to leave you yet," Wilhelmina said, her voice weak but determined. "We still have more life to live together." And they did. Wilhelmina recovered fully, though she was never quite as strong as she had been before, but she was there to see Emma's children grow up and get married. She was there to hold her great-grandchildren. She was there to celebrate Dalton's 70th birthday, a grand affair that brought the whole family together. On that birthday, Dalton stood in the clearing where they had celebrated so many milestones and looked around at the dozens of people gathered there. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends filled the space, all there to honor him. He raised his glass in a toast and said, "I came to these mountains a broken man, looking for a place to hide from life. But life found me anyway, in the form of a brave woman with a secret and a dream. Everything you see here, everyone gathered in this place, exists because Wilhelmina Zimmerman took a chance on me. So this is not really my birthday celebration. It is a celebration of the family we built and the love that made it all possible." Everyone cheered, and Wilhelmina, sitting in a comfortable chair that Dalton had carried out for her, smiled through her tears. She looked at the faces around her, at the legacy she and Dalton had created, and felt a deep sense of peace. They had done it. They had taken two broken lives and made something whole and beautiful. They had turned scandal into strength, fear into courage, and loneliness into love. As the sun began to set on that perfect day, casting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Wilhelmina thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the scared young woman who had stepped off the stage in Hill City, clutching her belly and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She thought about the mountain man with sad blue eyes who had offered her kindness when she needed it most. She thought about the choice they had both made to trust each other, to build a life together, to create a family. And she thought about Emma, her firstborn, who had never known a moment of doubt about who her father was. Emma, who had grown up strong and confident, loved by both her parents equally. Emma, who was passing that same love and security onto her own children and grandchildren. That night, after everyone had gone home and the cabin was quiet again, Dalton and Wilhelmina sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, holding hands as they had done countless times before. The stars were coming out, brilliant against the dark sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. "Do you have any regrets?" Wilhelmina asked softly. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I regret that Sarah and my first Emma did not live to see the life I built after them. I regret the years I spent alone in these mountains, closed off from the world. But I do not regret a single day since you came into my life. You were my second chance, Wilhelmina, my chance to love again, to be a father again, to believe in happiness again. How could I regret any of that?" "I do not have any regrets either," Wilhelmina said. "Even the hard parts, even the pain and fear, all of it was necessary to bring me here, to you, to this life. I would go through it all again if I had to." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. And when they finally went inside to bed, they moved with the ease of long practice, each knowing what the other needed without asking. The years passed, and Dalton and Wilhelmina grew older still. They moved more slowly, napped more often, and relied more on their family to help with things they could no longer do themselves. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that had burned for decades and showed no signs of going out. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw a massive celebration. People came from all over the Black Hills, many of them descendants of the neighbors who had helped Dalton build the additions to the cabin all those years ago. There were toasts and speeches, and someone had even found a photographer to take pictures of the whole family gathered together. When it was Dalton's turn to speak, he stood with some difficulty, his body bent with age but his voice still strong. 50 years ago, I married a woman who had every reason not to trust me, a woman who was brave enough to take a chance when it was offered, a woman who became my partner, my best friend, my love. Wilhelmina, you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You have given me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You have given me purpose and joy and meaning. But most of all, you have given me love. Steady, true, unchanging love. And I hope you know that I have tried every single day to be worthy of that gift. There was not a dry eye in the crowd, least of all Wilhelmina's. She stood up slowly, and Dalton helped her to her feet. Dalton Hayes, she said, her voice wavering with emotion, you have been worthy of my love every single day of our marriage. You took me in when I had nowhere else to go. You loved my daughter as your own. You built this family with me, brick by brick and day by day. You have been my rock, my shelter, my home, and I want you to know that I would choose you again, in every lifetime, in every circumstance. You are the love of my life, now and always. They kissed, to the cheers and applause of their family, and in that moment, they were not old. They were young again, standing on the porch of the cabin after their wedding, beginning their life together with hope and determination. They were middle-aged, building additions to the cabin and raising their children. They were all the ages they had ever been, all at once, because their love transcended time. The celebration went on long into the night, but eventually, Dalton and Wilhelmina retired to their bedroom, exhausted, but happy. As they lay together in the darkness, Wilhelmina said, I hope I die before you do. What? Why would you say that? Dalton asked, alarmed. Because I do not think I could survive losing you. You are part of me now, woven into every fiber of my being. If you go first, I will grieve, but I will have our children and grandchildren to help me through. But I cannot bear the thought of you being alone again, the way you were after Sarah died. Dalton held her tighter. I would not be alone. I would have our family. I know, but promise me something. If I go first, promise me you will not shut yourself away. Promise me you will let our children take care of you, that you will stay engaged with life. Promise me you will remember that you have many reasons to keep living, even if I am not one of them anymore. I promise, Dalton said, his voice thick with tears. But only if you promise me the same thing. If I go first, you cannot give up. You have to keep living, keep loving our family, keep being the amazing woman you have always been. I promise, Wilhelmina whispered. They fell asleep holding each other, and when morning came, they woke to another day of life together. It was a gift, they both knew. Every day was a gift at their age. But they had learned long ago not to take such gifts for granted. Dalton lived to the age of 78. It was a good, long life. And he died the way he would have wanted to, quietly in his sleep with Wilhelmina beside him. She woke one morning to find that he had passed during the night, his face peaceful and his hand still holding hers. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her, but she remembered her promise. She let their children take care of her. She stayed engaged with life, even though part of her wanted to follow Dalton wherever he had gone. At the funeral, Emma stood beside her mother and said, He was the best father anyone could have asked for. Biology did not matter. He chose me and he loved me, and that is what made him my father. He loved you so much, Wilhelmina said through her tears. All of you. You were his greatest joy. After Dalton's death, Wilhelmina moved in with Emma and Thomas. She could not bear to stay in the cabin without him, though she visited often, sitting on the porch and remembering all the years they had spent there together. She remained active in the lives of her children and grandchildren, telling stories about Dalton and making sure that his legacy lived on. 3 years after Dalton's death, on a warm spring day when the columbines were blooming on the hillside, Wilhelmina passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her family. She was 81 years old, and she had lived a life full of love and purpose. They buried her beside Dalton, on the hillside overlooking the cabin where they had built their life together. The whole family gathered for the service. and there were so many people that they covered the hillside like wildflowers. Emma spoke at the funeral, her voice steady despite her tears. "My mother was the bravest person I ever knew," she said. "She came to these mountains with nothing but courage and a baby in her belly. She could have given up so many times, but she never did. She met my father, Dalton Hayes, and together they built a family and a life that has touched dozens of people across 3 generations. They showed us what real love looks like, what commitment and sacrifice and partnership mean. They showed us that family is not just about blood, but about choice and love and dedication, and they showed us that even when life seems impossible, there is always hope for a new beginning." After the funeral, the family gathered at the cabin one last time. They stood in the clearing where Dalton and Wilhelmina had celebrated so many milestones, and they told stories and remembered. Emma's eldest son, who was now a grown man with children of his own, said, "This place is magic, not because of the mountains or the views, though those are spectacular, but because of what Grandma and Grandpa built here. They created a refuge, a sanctuary, a place where love was always more important than anything else, and I think we need to make sure that legacy continues." The family agreed. They decided to keep the cabin in the family, passing it down through the generations so that there would always be a Hayes presence in these mountains. They would maintain it together, use it for family gatherings, and make sure that the story of Dalton and Wilhelmina was never forgotten. Years later, Emma's great-grandchildren would sit on that same hillside, picking columbines and listening to stories about the pregnant bride who hid the father's name, and the mountain man who said the child would be his. They would learn about courage and kindness and the transformative power of love. They would understand that family is built, not born, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unlikely sources. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pine trees and the stars came out over the mountains, some said you could still feel the presence of Dalton and Wilhelmina in that place. Not as ghosts, but as a lingering warmth, a sense of welcome and safety and home. Because some loves are so strong, they leave an imprint on the very land itself, a blessing that extends beyond death into forever. The cabin still stands in the Black Hills, a testament to 2 people who found each other when both were lost and who built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives. It is a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. And it is proof that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, the ones we build with love and determination and faith in each other. Dalton and Wilhelmina's story became a legend in the Black Hills, passed down through generations. The pregnant bride and the mountain man who offered her sanctuary, the woman who learned to trust again and the man who learned to love again. 2 people who defied the odds and created a legacy that would outlast them both. And in the end, that is what love is meant to do. Not just to sustain us through our own lives, but to create something that extends beyond us, touching lives we will never meet and shaping a future we will never see. Dalton and Wilhelmina understood that, lived it, and left it as their gift to all who came after. Their story is a reminder that sometimes the end of one thing is just the beginning of something better. That courage can be found in the most desperate moments. That love, real love, is about choice and commitment, not just biology or circumstance, and that no matter where we come from or what mistakes we have made, we all deserve a second chance at happiness. The mountains remember, the cabin remembers, and the family remembers, passing the story down with pride and love, ensuring that Dalton Hayes and Wilhelmina Zimmerman Hayes will never be forgotten, their love immortal as the mountains themselves.